The fluorescent lights in the 17th floor conference room hummed like something alive, and Odell Marsh could hear his own pulse under that hum, steady and too fast at the same time. 23 people sat around the glass table, all of them dressed sharper than he was, all of them older, all of them watching Garrison Vale rock back in his chair with the particular smile of a man who had never once in his life been told no. On the screen behind him glowed the words, Vale Systems, unbreakable. The tagline the marketing team had spent $400,000 developing, and in 11 minutes, a room full of government contractors from 3 different agencies were going to decide whether to renew a $200 million security contract based on whether they believed that word. Garrison had asked for silence, and he got it, except for the soft click of Odell's laptop keys. The only person in the room, still working while everyone else waited for the real presentation to begin. That was what set him off. Garrison hated being background noise in his own building. You, Garrison said, snapping his fingers once, twice, toward the back corner. The intern, Marsh, right? You've been typing through my entire pitch, like you've got somewhere better to be. The room turned. Odell felt the heat crawl up his collar, but he kept his voice even. Just running a diagnostic, sir. Habit. A diagnostic. Garrison laughed, and 3 junior executives laughed with him, a half-second late, the way people do when they're following someone else's cue, rather than their own amusement. You hear this? Company's about to close the biggest deal of the year, and the intern thinks our system needs a diagnostic. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked the length of the table with the loose, easy stride of a man performing for an audience he already owned. Tell you what, everybody's heard the pitch about how unbreakable we are. Let's have some fun instead. Hack this, right now, in front of everybody. You get past our perimeter, I'll sign the company over to you myself. I'll do it on video. He grinned at the government reps like he was letting them in on a private joke. And if you can't, which you can't, you're going to learn something today about staying in your lane. Nobody in the room laughed at that part. A woman near the window, silver-haired, wearing a badge that read Depth of Defense Cyber Directorate, set down her coffee without drinking it. Odell didn't move for a long moment. He thought about his mother, folding towels at 2 in the morning after her shift at the hospital, telling him that dignity wasn't about winning arguments, it was about choosing your battles so carefully that when you finally fought, nobody could say you started it. He thought about his father, who he barely remembered except in fragments, a laugh, a smell of engine grease and coffee, a folded flag that lived in a cedar box in his mother's closet. Then he closed his laptop, opened it again, and said, in a voice so quiet that people had to lean in, okay. He didn't touch the company's main servers. That would have been reckless, and reckless was for people who could afford consequences. Instead, he opened a terminal window and typed 11 lines of code, tracing not an attack, but a request, a diagnostic ping routed through the very perimeter. Software Vale Systems had built its reputation on the kind of harmless test any junior engineer ran a dozen times a day, except this time, the ping didn't bounce back clean. It came back with a shadow, a second signature layered underneath Vale's own, an authentication handshake that didn't belong to any employee badge, running on a maintenance protocol that had supposedly been retired 18 months earlier. Odell felt his stomach drop the way it does at the top of a staircase. You thought had one more step. There's already someone inside, he said. Garrison's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Cute. Nice try, kid. I'm not trying anything. Odell turned the laptop around so the table could see the raw log, scrolling past. This isn't me hacking in. This is someone already in watching. There's an active session on a maintenance node that was supposed to be decommissioned. It's been open based on the timestamp cycling for 11 days. The woman with the Dodd badge stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. Say that again. 11 days, Odell said. Whoever it is has touch access to the same layer your system's interface with. If it's real, It's not a diagnostic anymore. The room that had been performing calm for the government reps now became, in the space of 4 seconds, a room of people who had forgotten there were government reps in it at all. Garrison's chief technology officer, a heavyset man named Wendell Ashby, who had barely looked at Odell all quarter, was suddenly beside him, breathing hard, pulling up mirrored logs on his own tablet. He's right. Oh, God, he's right. That's the Kestrel node. We never fully sunset Kestrel. We just took it off the dashboard. You hit a vulnerability instead of fixing it, Odell said, not as an accusation, just as a fact laid on the table like a card no one wanted to see. Garrison's face had gone the color of wet cement. This is a stunt, he said, though there was no confidence left in it. This is some kid trying to make himself look. Sir, the Dodd woman's voice cut through the room like a blade drawn from a sheath. Her name, stitched small above her badge, read C.O. Yelloran. If there is an unauthorized, persistent session inside a system that interfaces with federal infrastructure, this is no longer a company matter. I need that terminal, and I need it now. And I need everyone who is not essential personnel out of this room. In the next 90 seconds, what followed was not the kind of scene that happens in movies. All shouting and sprinting. It was, worse, in its own way, a controlled, terrible quiet. The quiet of professionals who understood exactly how bad the thing in front of them was, and had trained their whole careers not to show it on their faces. Phones came out. Doors were locked from the inside. Someone from facilities was told, calmly, to shut down guest Wi-Fi across the entire floor. O'Yelleran made 2 calls in under a minute, and by the second call, she wasn't speaking to anyone in the building anymore. Odell sat very still, hands folded in his lap. Now, watching the machine he'd built. A career dream. Around a company he'd taken this unpaid internship at because Vale Systems' name had been stamped on the recruiting poster in his college's engineering building. The same building where his father's photograph hung in a hallway dedicated to alumni who'd served being taken apart in real time by the very flaw its CEO had just dared someone to find. Ashby crouched beside him. Where did you learn to trace a shadow session like that? That's not undergrad curriculum. That's not even our curriculum. Odell hesitated. It wasn't a question he liked answering, because the honest answer opened a door into a part of himself he kept mostly closed. The way you keep a wound wrapped so it doesn't catch on things. My dad taught me the basics before he shipped out the last time. He was Navy, Cyber, Warfare Division. He used to say the safest systems weren't the ones with the strongest locks. They were the ones honest enough to admit they had doors. Nobody remembered building. He looked at the frozen log on the screen, the cursor blinking patiently over 11 days of quiet trespass. He died before I turned 9. I kept studying it because it was the last thing that felt like him. Ashby didn't say anything to that. He didn't need to. Sentence could. By the time 2 black SUVs pulled beneath the building's awning, 40 minutes later, the 17th floor had been sealed. Badge access citywide had been frozen for Vale Systems employees, and Garrison Vale, the man who 20 minutes earlier had promised on camera to sign away his company, sat alone in his glass office with his tie loosened and his hands pressed flat against his desk like he was trying to keep it from spinning. He was not under arrest. Not yet. But he understood, with the sick clarity of a man watching his own life narrow into a single hallway, that whatever came next would not be decided by him. O'Yelleran found Odell in the break room an hour later, the only calm space left on the floor, nursing a paper cup of water, because someone had told him not to touch anything with wires in it until the response team cleared the building. She sat across from him without asking. You know what you found, she said. An intrusion. You know what you found, she repeated. Softer. Was a foreign actor sitting inside a private contractor's infrastructure that has a live data sharing agreement with 3 federal systems, including one that touches missile defense telemetry. 11 days. Do you understand? What? 11 days of quiet access to that kind of proximity means? Odell's mouth had gone dry. I didn't think about the scale of it. I was just trying to answer a dare, without breaking anything. You didn't break anything. She almost smiled. The first almost smile he'd seen from her all day. You unbroke something that had been broken for a year and a half, and nobody had the humility to look for it, because looking for it would have meant admitting the great Garrison Vale built his empire on a system he never finished checking. She studied him a long moment, the way people study something they're trying to decide whether they've misjudged. What's your degree in, Mr. Marsh? I don't have one yet. I'm a junior. I'm here on a work-study internship, unpaid, 3 days a week, and I drive for a rideshare app, the other 4 to cover rent. He said it plainly, without shame, because his mother had taught him shame was a debt you should never agree to owe for the crime of working hard. O'Yelleran reached into her jacket and set a card on the table between them, black with a single, embossed emblem, no title, no explanation beyond a phone number. There's a fellowship, federal, cyber defense track, full funding, housing stipend, and when it's done, a placement that isn't glamorous, but matters more than anything happening in that boardroom upstairs. I don't offer this to people. I offer it to people I've watched actually do the work under pressure while men twice their age panicked in real time. She stood, straightened her jacket. Call the number. Don't overthink it. People who overthink kindness usually miss it. She left him alone with the card, the hum of the emptied floor, and the strange, hollow disbelief of a person whose whole life had just pivoted on an 11-line diagnostic and a dare meant to humiliate him. The story of what happened at Vale Systems did not stay contained, the way these things never do. Once federal vehicles have been photographed outside a corporate headquarters by half a dozen phones from the sidewalk. Within 2 days, it had a name in the press. Nobody at the company chose the intern who found the ghost in the machine, and within a week, Garrison Vale had resigned as CEO, under pressure from a board that could no longer pretend the near catastrophic breach and his own recorded arrogance were separate problems. He did not go to prison. He hadn't broken a law by being cruel, only by being negligent. And negligence in America rarely costs a rich man more than his title. But something in him did change, in the strange, delayed way shame sometimes ripens into understanding. 3 months later, at a small industry panel nobody expected him to attend, he stood at a podium, visibly smaller than the man who had once promised to sign away an empire on camera, and said, without notes, that the worst mistake of his career wasn't the vulnerability his own team had buried. It was standing in a room full of talent his company had underpaid, underestimated, and overlooked, and mocking the one person sharp enough to see what everyone else had missed. He didn't name Odell. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room already knew. Odell called the number on the card 2 days after O'Yelleran gave it to him, not because he'd overcome his disbelief, but because his mother, when he told her the story that night at their kitchen table, had gone very quiet, then reached across and touched the cedar box she still kept on the shelf above the stove, the one with the folded flag inside, and said, "Your father used to say the same thing that woman said to you, that the safest systems are honest ones. Baby, I think he'd want you to walk through that door." He accepted the fellowship the following semester. He finished his degree 18 months later, and the placement O'Yelleran had promised turned out to be exactly as unglamorous and exactly as important as she'd described. A windowless office in a nondescript federal building, long hours, no headlines, work that would never make the news. Precisely because it was done right the first time. He kept a photograph of his father on his desk, beside a small folded card, worn soft at the corners now, the one that had started it all. On the first anniversary of that boardroom afternoon, he received a single email with no subject line, sent from an address he didn't recognize. It contained 4 words, "Thank you for finding it." It was signed only with the initial G. He never confirmed who sent it, and he never needed to. Some doors, once opened, honestly, don't require an explanation to stay open. They just need someone willing enough in a room full of people who'd already decided who he was, to say okay and start typing.
This story reminds us that quiet strength often speaks the loudest. Real courage does not shout, it shows up, does the work, and lets the results speak for themselves. If this touched your heart, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And I will see you in the next story.